chap. But the thing is this illustrates two things, that there were lots of different vessels, and there were lots of different things that can go in vessels. So when it started out, you could have the vessel, and then you could have the drawing of the same vessel with something inside it, or you could have a drawing of something else inside that picture. And so you have a pictographic framework of a sign like vessel. And as the script developed, they realized by plonking in a small thing, you extend the range of a given sign into other things which naturally, semantically or intellectually are obviously connected. So that was a very remarkable matter, very fruitful. So that looks to me like a straight sign for beer standing on end. But there's something else, because cash, we agree, is an essential part of the human world. But when the script moved from doing a picture of something that everybody would understand, like, for example, a milk bottle on a piece of paper for the milkman, no problem about it, that tradition of signs that looked like what they meant, or signs that looking like what they meant had an extra component to show what they really meant, is one big sweep of the evolution of the writing system. But there's another thing, because they didn't only want to record pictures of ideas, they wanted to record language. So in Sumerian, you have animate and inanimate. So ani means his, and bi means its. So somebody in ancient Sumer, since you say its all the time, like you say his or hers in English all the time, they found themselves in a position that they had to have a sign for its. And you can't draw an it or a muchness or any of those complicated things. And there are many things that you can't draw. So they made a decision, and this, in my opinion, is how it worked. They decided to use a simple sign with only 4 wedges, which is what it turned into, for its. So when you have that sign in a cuneiform sentence where the words are not divided up, they're all written in a continuous line, when you reach that sign in its form like that or in a later form, it can either mean beer, the noun, and you have to know this, or it can mean its, which means it's linked to the word that came before.
Oh, this symbol here.
That very symbol. In this case, there's no question that it means beer, because this is an accounting text with lots of numbers. You see, there are lots of circles and half circles.
Oh, yes. So like here and here and here.
Yes.
And the like.
They are all numbers. So the half ones are 10.
Right.
And the others are 1 or 60, but there are more subtle ones as well. And as the script developed, and this script has developed to a long way, it's written not with a point, but with a stylus. Once you get to this stage, the writing of numbers and the concomitant numerical system kept pace with it, so that literacy and numeracy, as you would say if you were running a primary school, at the beginning of history, evolved together. And many things about that are remarkable because, for example, it's shown and established from the beginning of the study of this material that the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians first, and then the Assyrians and Babylonians, they had a mathematical system which was sexagesimal. That is to say, their convenient starting point on which everything was plastered was the number 60. And mathematicians tell me that 60 is more flexible and more useful than 10. But of course, 10 is the natural thing because, barring accidents, people have 10 digits. And everybody in the world counts on their fingers. So one might assume, although anthropologists or mathematicians will probably throw up their hands in horror at such a simplistic argument, but you might say that the counting's intent was intrinsic to the human brain, and in fact you can burn me at the stake and I'll never give up that argument. But the decimal system, at the very earliest level, chronologically, in this long evolving story, was limited to certain materials. So there were things like barley, which are measured in 60s, and other things measured in tens.
Sorry, you said barley there. Is this what this represents? This kind of stalk? Is that?
I think
is
it
that,
is. It's either barley or a barley-like sign.
Got
because,
it.
Normally the parallel strokes
Yes.
are more numerous with barley, but I think that's some kind of grain sign.
Okay. Yes.
Yes. So what happened was that at a certain level, they reserved, counting in 60 for things in a storeroom, this, and all those things are 60s. And those things over there, we have to count in tens. And what happened was that the decimal system, practically speaking, vanished. So you have what turned into grown-up cuneiform, when we look at a later thing, you have a single upright wedge, which is the number 1, and also the number 60. So that you have combinations of wedges from 1 to 60, which explain everything very beautifully. The reason why this is so important is that when people say, like, we don't need universities to study Assyriology, it's no use to anybody, it's a waste of time, it has nothing to do with us today, and all those sort of well-known arguments, the fact is that the division of our time into 60 seconds and then 60 minutes and 360 degrees of the circle are a direct inheritance of the numerical system, which is already expressed in that tablet, that 60 is the basic counting system. And it went from, of course, Sumerian into Babylonian all the way down to the end of the cuneiform epoch, and was scooped up by the Greeks when they went to Babylon to find out what they knew about everything, and found they knew rather a lot. And they exported data sexagesimally stored and within their own astronomy and mathematical system. So that's why eventually we have 60 seconds in a minute.
It's amazing, though, that kind of idea of 60 can originate with like some of the earliest cuneiform tablets that survive in these. We think that they are commerce transactions, for the trade routes of Mesopotamia at that time.
Well, the information in them usually involves produce within the periphery of the estate, the surrounding fields and the organised work labour and so forth, but also with trade, both within ancient Iraq and beyond the borders, because I think trade goes back to the very beginning of time, long before this tablet was written in, what did we say, 2800 BC?
Yes, early third millennium BC. So want to have a bit of a unique angle when approaching cuneiform, Irving, and with an expert like you in the room, it would be amazing to get you to write a little bit out.
We can do that.
How does this look to you? I've got just kind of a blank sheet of virtual paper in front.
Okay.
If you'd be happy for me to give you that.
Lovely, and a stylus.
That's, it's your 21st century clay tablet and your 21st century stylus. And now I've got to think what we want to write.
Well, two things. Firstly, that to write cuneiform, you only need 3 kinds of stroke. Okay, should we do that?
Yes, let's do that. Thank you. Let's do the basics.
So we have to have, whoops, bit wobbly, a horizontal. Okay, and then we have a vertical, and then we have a diagonal. So when you write your tablet, you need to learn, you have to have the clay object in your left hand and you have your writing stick. You have to learn how to apply the edge of the writing stick to produce a horizontal wedge or a vertical wedge or a diagonal wedge. And when you can do those 3, you can do anything, because some signs have many wedges and some have only a few. So for example, we were talking about the word gish, which means wood in Sumerian. So to write gish, we'll write it up here first. That means sh. So in Sumerian, which is here, we write 1 horizontal. Gosh, it's very wobbly. That is the sign gish for wood.
Right, okay.
So in Babylonian, no, the important thing is in Babylonian, it's for is, it's, s, or s. So in other words, because this equals itsu in Babylonian, God, it's so difficult to explain this, but because the word, this is the Sumerian word for wood, and this is the Babylonian word for wood. So you can see the relationship between them, the bilingual relationship. But as well as that, because itsu is a simple sign, a simple word, you can write the syllables is, its, s, or ets using this sign, which has nothing to do with wood, but just the sound. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, that's an important matter. And this is extended all the way through the whole panoply of signs. That's one thing. So let's say we wanted to write,
You're hard at work there, Irving.
Certainly am. Okay.
Wow.
So this is the name of Alexander.
Is it? In cuneiform.
I didn't finish the last bit. I've written some cryptographic stuff here as well. So this is the number 1, which means Mr.
And that's the gender determinative, is it, at the beginning? Got it, yeah?
Exactly. So this is R, this is Lik, this is Sa, this is An, this is Da, and this is R. So this shows you have some vowel signs, which is simple, R, A, U, and E. You have some consonant, vowel, consonant signs, as well as syllables. We didn't really talk about the fact that most of the signs are syllabic. Okay? So you either have consonant vowel or vowel consonant. So this is a vowel consonant, is. This is a sign which has consonant vowel consonant. So this is going to put everybody off. So this sign here, which we're using to spell Lik in Alexander. So this is the sign Lik. It can also be read or, and it can also be read Tash.
Right.
All those 3 values. Okay? So this is a consonant vowel, and this is a consonant vowel consonant, and this is a consonant vowel consonant. So when you know this sign, you've got all these 3 things. So you can use it to write Lik in the middle of a word. You can use it to write or in the middle of the word, but or also means dog, and you can write or meaning dog when you have to put the Babylonian word dog in, and so forth. But you'll get the hang of it, as I say. So maybe in your case, I think maybe 15 years will be enough.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Finkel, I have one last challenge for you. We are, of course, on the Ancients podcast today. How would you go about writing the Ancients in cuneiform? Let's say Babylonian cuneiform.
Okay, we'll do this in Babylonian script, like if we were working for Nebuchadnezzar.
Taken to that 21st century stylus, like a duck to water.
A drunk duck in murky water with weeds in it. Yes. So this says Lu, which is man.
Okay.
Which is here a determinative. And this says U, Ol, Li, Ash, which means from time immemorial, something like that. Actually, it means going back and going forward. So
kind of
you could say eternal man. How's that? Would that do?
The eternal man. That would do. That would do, Irving. Thank you so much for doing that for us. Well, Irving, should we move on then from this? So we kind of covered that early story of cuneiform with pictograms. So like from there, the evolution of cuneiform, it's not like at one moment it goes from pictures to what we're more associated with today. It's quite a long evolution of cuneiform into perhaps the most detailed creation of it in the first millennium BC?
Well, if we look at a list of early pictographs drawn with a point, where it all begins, you have signs where anybody, when they see them, know what they stand for. So that is a crucial point. That's a crucial point. So we have a writing system which, when we first encounter it, serves to communicate ideas without any language. So you can write numbers and you can write picture signs to create a message without any grammar or syntax involved in it, just a simple kind of accounting system. And it must be that the very earliest signs worked this way, and very gradually it occurred to them that signs could be pressed into different kinds of function. One of them would be to express grammar, the particles of grammar, the elements of grammar, and like using the word for beer to write its, which otherwise is a difficult problem. So this is an ongoing system that you have a very stark and simple pictographic level, which in one way or another evolves into the situation where the individual signs are drawn with straight edges, and the straight edges themselves at the beginning are very pictograph-like. So when you look at early cuneiform, you can see what they come from. You can see it's the head of a boar with a horn or something like that. You can tell that they are pictographic. But what happens over a long period of time is that the drawing of the signs stylizes and stylizes to the point that the innate pictographic quality disappears from view, that the signs become, in a sense, abstracted from their origin. This is an important matter because when you start to learn cuneiform, you never start with the pictures. You only start with the developed cuneiform signs, of which there are about 900 or 1,000, something like that. And as time goes by, abandoning their artistic curvy forms into straight edge and rigor and system, then they become further and further divorced from their origins, so that, for example, if you have a tablet written 500 years after the beginning of cuneiform, nobody could tell you what it was about by looking at the signs and saying, oh, this is a chap, this is a that, this is that, or it must be this, like people used to do with Egyptian hieroglyphs before they knew how they functioned. So this is an ongoing process from curvy pictographic signs drawn with a point into mature cuneiform. And if you look through the millennia, because we have proper cuneiform by 2800, like in your picture, all the way down to the 1st century AD. So this is a very, very long process. Gradually, over this process, two things happened. One is that the way people wrote their signs in Babylonia in the south was slightly different from the way they wrote them in the north. And this is interesting because the Akkadian language, which we know at the beginning of this writing nearly, the Akkadian tongue sharpens out into an Assyrian dialect, as we said, and a Babylonian dialect. So the two languages divulge, but so do the signs in a matching way. So that, for example, if you know about cuneiform, if you see a tablet without even reading any of the words, you know it's a Babylonian hand or an Assyrian hand. So the two functions run in parallel. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, and this is the most important insight into the whole matter, in my opinion, is this. It's the stylization and the acceptance by all concerned of what the form of a sign is. So if you have a situation with fertile imaginations of lively and competitive individuals in a position of authority with a bit of power, and this new writing system comes along and they get the hang of it, so they all do it and they all think about it, and then they all have these signs and they all have their own signs for this, and then someone says, oh, we've got to have a sign for chariot wheel, and we've got to have a sign for telephone box and all this kind of thing. So before you know where you are, you have a proliferation of pictograms which are only really understandable to the people who invented the particular ones. This never happens. So when we have a horizon with early dynastic signs and pre-early dynastic signs on clay tablets from places in Mesopotamia, there are not 7 or 8 systems running. It's one system.
Right.
And there may be the odd thing people say, oh, this looks like the way Lagash people do the sign for. Maybe. But in principle, it's one system. And this is, in my opinion, immensely diagnostic, because the natural function here would be for things to proliferate and people to compete and people to set up their own thing. And we're doing it this way if you don't like it and all that. Because that's what human beings do. And these Sumerians, they may look stiffish on their monuments and in their chariots with big noses and funny flowered skirts, but they were exactly the same as people are today. This is a very important principle, and you can attribute to these people the same kind of psychological tricks, characteristics and behaviour, in my opinion, as you would witness in any number of persons surrounding us in London. So this is serious matter. So what happens here is we have to assume that the Amphictyony, which is implied by this seal with all these cities in conjunction, must have had political consequence. And it must have been that somebody called a summit at some point to say, we all know, ladies and gentlemen, about this new writing nonsense. Well, it's going to be very useful to us all, but the first thing we have to do is to standardize it. Otherwise, it will be self-defeating. This is the sort of thing they should have done when they invented the internet. But of course, man never learns from his own history. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any more wars, for example. Just an aside there. But the thing is, it seems to me compellingly certain that the direction of the script was controlled from the beginning. And the only way that can happen is by one human brain, not by a committee. There must have been a person who exercised sufficient compelling power and authority and charisma, who saw what would happen if this was left to run naturally, who took over and supervised it. And the thing is this: despite the 2 languages and the evolution of the languages themselves, because all languages evolve, and the evolution of the way the signs were written, the repertoire was never allowed to grow wild, all the way down to the end of time. This seems to me immensely significant. So that scribes in the 2nd millennium, they knew what all the signs were. They had their lexical texts with all the lists of words, the words for colours, for lands, for different kinds of wood, different kinds of stone. And they were copied and copied and copied and copied. And the writing evolved. It got more casual. It got more this whole stylistic changes in the writing, and the language, as I said, changes, like Chaucer in modern English. The language evolves, but the cuneiform conception ran clear and free like a river without any real deviation. And in my opinion, that is not a natural matter. So especially, for example, you could say this: in the 1st millennium BC, we jump ahead a long way to when there were like universities, so to speak, in Babylonia. So in the city of Uruk, in the city of Babylon, in the city of Borsippa, probably a few other places, there were libraries originally, temporal libraries, which blossomed out into some kind of establishment where scholarly matters and astronomical matters and mathematical things and medicine were studied and developed in conjunction, people working together. They had kind of schools of stuff, very important matter. And sometimes we have a very significant document, kind of medicine or something, and it says at the bottom, it's ruled off, tablet of Mr. So-and-so from Babylon. Do not show this to anybody from Uruk. Not allowed. So, when you read the cuneiform, it just looks like cuneiform. But when you suddenly hear the voice and someone wagging a finger, don't let those bastards get hold of this. This is our stuff. They're not allowed to. So it's not copyright for money, but nevertheless, there is a sort of guild or some such conception keeping a rivalry among them free. But even given that, you don't get sign forms going off at a mad tangent. So if they don't like us, we'll have our own. We'll invent a sign for this. It never happens. And it's easy to overlook this point, but I don't think it's easy to overemphasize it, because it seems to me beyond doubt that this must be a central truth about this script, that there was a control from day one, and it was a self-regulating system.
I mean, so much we could go talk about from there. I think first of all, let's have a look at this image here, just to kind of reinforce what you just said with the evolution of cuneiform and how it's shown.
That's a very handy modern device.
It is, yes, isn't it?
To get a Sumerian in here this afternoon like that is terrifically impressive.
My alter ego is a Sumerian, so I'm very happy
I often get that feeling. But don't tell anybody else. So look, we've got four characters here, right?
Yes, and let's describe it. So we've got fish at the top,
right?
And so the top left is like a pictogram of it, and it looks like a fish. It's that one. It's like the kind of the curving, and it's the curving creation of it as well. So very much early on,
right?
And then at the Old Babylonian period, from what you were saying, so Old Babylonians, that's about, when do we say?
1800s, but probably before that.
Right.
Probably before that. So you get the pictograph, and I think if you look at that barley, the reed, and look at the fish, it's like a child's drawing.
Yes.
The main points, so everybody can understand it. And then two things happen. One of them is they change direction, they rotate, which is strange, but they do. That's a complicated dead end, which I don't think we need to go around. So you draw your fish, and then after a while, you draw the fish at a different angle, and then we get the jump from the pictographic curvy form to the cuneiform. So if you look at the fish, you've got 4 wedges drawn together with one to the right. So if you look at that sign, you've got the 4 together, which make the body of the fish.
Yeah. And
you've got a bit on the end, which is one of the fins. That's how it's worked. So it's reduced to these plonk, 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 plonk with your stylus end, your chopstick end, and you write that sign. So that sign, and the word for fish in Sumerian is ku, and it's also used for the sound ha. Ha is very important, because when you want something to happen, let it be in Sumerian. Ha and hu and che are the prefixes which get what you want. So ha is an important sound. So the sign was used for fish, which is read ku, and ha for the sound of ha. So the interesting thing is that ha doesn't really mean a word on its own. So that's what. In the next row, you've got a reed drawn like a realistic reed, and then it turns round the angle.
Yep.
And then in column 3, under what you call Old Babylonian, you've got that sign reduced to cuneiform signs.
And so even like now, like with the fish, you can, if you've seen the pictogram before, you can kind of see how it's become this sort of form.
Because if you look at the original reed, you've got a kind of bloop at the end, a loop. And that's the thing that you've done in red. In that picture, and then you've got the central shoot, which is the long horizontal in that drawing.
Hang on, so this is the shoot here.
That's the shoot,
and you say the shoot is this.
Well, you've got the shoot with the hairy bits off both sides.
Yes, exactly.
So in fact, it's a transposition into wedge shapes with this straight edge stylus, and the older they are, the closer they are. So when you look at it like that, you can see you've got the loop, the thread of the reed, and then the bits that come off each side.
Yes.
So that's it. So this is a pictographic sign involving into cuneiform form, but holding on to the pictographic quality. It comes through. But then if you go to the next, which is a big jump, you've got what you call the Assyrian system, where the sign for reed, you can see how that comes from the one you've just looked at.
Yes, you can.
You've got the 2 verticals, you've got the horizontal, and you've got the things which are above and below the line made into one bit of sign with 4 little components. You see what I mean?
This bit at the end here, right? Yeah.
So the principle would be that if you saw that Assyrian sign for the first time at Behistun, or you in the British Museum in 1850, you saw that through the case, you wouldn't think, that must be a reed. You wouldn't connect it with a reed. But when you have the stages antecedent to that phase, it's very easy to see how one changes gradually into the other. And of course, the columns that you have are rather starkly defined, but if you collect signs for all the intervening decades, then you can see very gradually. But the message that comes out of it is that the evolution is not interrupted by innovations. It's a kind of continuum. And then on the Babylonian column,
this one at the end,
you have more or less the same thing, except the way they represent the fuzzy bits of the reed is slightly different from the Assyrian.
And this is harkening back to what you said earlier, in that you can recognize an Assyrian hand from a Babylonian hand. Definitely. Because they have slight differences at that time.
Yes. And also the other thing about it is that the languages are literally dialects of Akkadian. So a Babylonian who went to Nineveh for a holiday would have no trouble going in the shops and buying his loaf of bread for breakfast and talking to people on the street. They have some vocabulary, some pronunciation, but it's like English and Scottish, mutually intelligible. Dialects is the thing.
Well, thank you for talking through this. I thought it was quite nice to have this as an image as well to kind of back up what you were talking about there. And I guess kind of going back to what we were talking back on an overarching point, with those evolution of those signs, when you put them together like that on that image, you can clearly see the evolution. But if you didn't have those joining dots, looking at a pictogram or one from the Sumerian times and then one from, let's say, Ashurbanipal's library in the first millennium BC, you wouldn't be able to realise.
Except in some cases, once in a while you might have an inkling of it or even identify it. But in general, that's true. So there are other things about this cuneiform writing system which are important, because just as you have a sign for Bir and Itz being one sign, the principle runs that a given sign can sometimes have multiple uses.
Right.
And this is what bewilders people who throw up their career as computer programmers and shopkeepers and decide to do Assyriology at university, when they discover this series of unfortunate events that lies ahead of them. Because a given cuneiform sign can have multiple uses. That's to say, it can function with more than one meaning when you look at it, more than one semantic significance. It can have more than one phonetic value, so it can have different pronunciations. And then it can be used in a different way. So, for example, they have things called determinatives. Now, if you ever looked at anything about ancient Egyptian, you know that when they did the picture writing, they had special signs like for weapon or for person or something like that, which they draw in front of the hieroglyphs for the word that follows. So these are called determinatives, and they are not pronounced, but they are written with signs which have their other meanings, both in terms of sound and meaning. It's ridiculous. Let me explain. There's a simple sign with two horizontals and then one vertical. So that it can be pronounced like this, gish. So in Sumerian, the word gish means wood. So if we're writing a Sumerian text and we're going to talk about a table made of a certain kind of wood, you write the sign gish as a determinative, so that the scribe reading out to the king about the new furniture, he would read the name of the table, but not the determinative, because that's for the reader only. So this sign gish can be used in one particular instance to mean wood determinative silently. Next thing is, it can mean wood. So you go into the forest and you cut down wood. Here's your sign where it's the sign wood. Then there's another side, as I explained, about the sound. For example, because Sumerian and Akkadian use the same writing system, the two languages are embedded with one another in the most intimate fashion. They are interwoven. You have a bilingual intellectual culture, and the two things are interwoven. So when we are writing, and we have the sign gish, which can mean the next word is wood. It can mean wood. Now, Sumerian gish, wood, in Babylonian is itsu. S with a dot. So the word for wood in Babylonian is itsu. So you can write the sign Sumerian gish in a sentence, which when you read it and you're reading Babylonian, you have to have the Babylonian word. So you have to know that the sign gish also is itsu in Babylonian and supply that in the Babylonian text.
So almost like kind of a translation of the word in the cuneiform, right?
Yes. This is a mad principle. The only commonplace example that people encounter in the world is this, that if you write the dollar sign in a sentence, $100 million, when you put the S with 2 lines in it, no one says 100 million S's with 2 lines through it. They supply the word dollar immediately, largely because people are more interested in money than anything else. But this is not an obstacle in reading when you have such a thing in English. You just do it. Well, in the cuneiform world, you do it all the time. So these are the consequences, that the sign for wood, which is gish in Sumerian, can be used to write itsu in Akkadian, but it can also be used to write as a syllable in Akkadian, not in it meaningful in its own way, but as a component writing something else, where the sound is or its occurs within a longer word, which has nothing to do with wood. So, for example, let's say you wanted to write the word miss when you were at school, miss, like that. So you have to have the sign mi, M-I, and the sign is, I-S. And the sign itsu can also be isu and etsu and etsu. All the related sounds can be used with the sign which in Sumerian means wood, in Akkadian can mean wood, but also can be used just as syllables in a bigger word. So you would write mi, is, and when you saw this as a Sumerian, there are different ways you could interpret it. I don't know if we're going to get into hot water here, but let's imagine that you're a Sumerian, you see the sign mi and the sign is. Well, mi can mean night or it can mean black, depending on how you pronounce it. But if you had black wood in Sumerian, you'd have to have wood with black after it. So it can't be mi is, it would have to be gish mi. So it's not that. So mi has to be a phonetic thing spelling a sound. So write mi, and then if the next sign has the value beginning with I, well, if it's mi, e, it's very likely to link. So you write mi is, which means miss, and then you put your hand up. So this simple illustration of the multiple uses of signs is quite bewildering when you first encounter it. But if you lie down in a darkened room and drink cold water regularly, it'll all come to you in a flash. But the point is this, that the signs are multivalent. So when you have a sign which has one set of phonetic values and one set of meanings, sometimes there are many of them.
It's a process of elimination, is it? But
it's a process of elimination, and reading as many texts as possible, because what happens is that you get into the way of thinking of the Babylonian scribe. You know what usages are common, what are uncommon, you know, you become so familiar with the matter that there's no difficulty. And after about 25 years, you can read fluently.
Irving, I must admit, especially for like audio, it's a complex topic, isn't it, cuneiform, and trying to explain the many different pieces of this writing system. And as you said, it takes a long time to master. So I'm very grateful for you to still delve into the weeds about it. But let's bring us back up from the detail now. How long does cuneiform endure for as a writing system? I mean, if we started more than 5,000 years ago, how long does it continue for these various Mesopotamian societies?
Well, I think the latest dated cuneiform tablet is from the 1st century AD. It's an almanac, an astronomical almanac. And so at that period, you have probably the remnants of these, as it were, universities, in inverted commas, from earlier centuries, where things were still studied. There were still people looking at the skies, making calculations, thinking things, making records, and reading older things. And the number of people who did it must have gradually reduced, because at that period, Aramaic had supplanted the Babylonian language as a spoken language at the end of the 1st millennium, probably increasingly through the 1st millennium, and then Greek, and then Arabic, and into the modern world. And so you have to imagine that in these places in Babylonia, there were old men and less old men, and then not many old men, and then the last guy who could read the stuff expired, and that was that. And at that moment, cuneiform writing became extinct, and that must have happened. But the language, of course, not. And there are outpockets of spoken Aramaic, even in northern Iraq, where people today speak a form of Aramaic which is a linear, direct descendant of the Aramaic spoken when the Assyrians and Babylonians were running the country in the first millennium. It just survived among those people, and they speak that language. But the Babylonian tongue probably reduced massively in comparison with Aramaic as time went by, not least for the fact that you could write Aramaic with an alphabet, and you could write it with 26 letters in ink, and gradually, you'd have the movement that recording on clay, with all its complexity and all its training, gradually became redundant in the commercial world or in the business world or in the administrative world, and it was reduced to these old crusty blokes looking from their ivory towers at the moon and predicting things for the future. So I think it's not over fanciful to think of that romantic, rather inspiring kind of thing. So probably sometime in the 1st century AD, the day came that if you'd gone with your microphone and tape recorder to Babylon looking for someone who could tell you about the old stories, there might be people who remember them by heart, but not who could read the inscriptions.
I think one of my favourite artifacts, Irving, kind of the colliding of the Greek world, but also Mesopotamian Babylon, is one of the cuneiform tablets, one of the astronomical diary entries that you have on display at the British Museum, which has that very pithy line, "The king died."
Yeah, and that's all they say.
That's all they say.
And Alexander the Great is the king in question. Excuse me.
Exactly.
I mean, what a king. Yes.
but you know, that is written in cuneiform in the 4th century BC.
It makes you jump, doesn't it?
And so the scholars are still using cuneiform for like celestial stuff in that time.
Yes, I think that was one of the very institutions where the diaries were kept, which soldiered on until the 1st century AD. It's really it's quite exciting when you see the name Alexander written in cuneiform for the first time. That also makes you jump like anything.
My only other one, before we completely wrap up, is that I see on many of these cuneiform tablets, like especially from the time that I know you've done lots of work around, like the Ark tablets, the Babylonian map of the world, which have the cuneiform on top. All of these symbols are jam-packed together. And for someone who doesn't know it, it's very difficult to distinguish symbol from symbol, and I guess also kind of sound from sound.
And word from word.
Or did they ever leave spaces or anything like that?
No, they don't. They weren't allowed to. They were taught to write in a continuum. And in the best literary tablets, we can see that in addition to that, they had right justification. So on the Gilgamesh tablets of Ashurbanipal, which are the highest kind of quality scribal achievements, all the lines end at the same point. And if the line is empty and there's extra space, they leave the space in the middle and they move the others up to the right-hand side. So they had right justification. But by and large, it is a bewildering thing when you start off that there's no gap between the words. But as you jump in, eventually you never think about it because somehow your mind adjusts to it. I mean, a good analogy here is if you study languages like Arabic or Hebrew, people who write Arabic and Hebrew don't write the vowels in. So when you start out, you think, oh, how on earth can they do this? Without any vowels, they've just got the skeleton. But people whose languages, they just read it and there's never any doubt. And it's something comparable to that.
I think, we'll have to save going into some of those exemplar cuneiform texts from the Library of Ashurbanipal for another day, won't we? And you see, because that's
lovely.
Those are the pinnacle of
they
cuneiform
are.
Texts.
There's lots and lots to say.
Well, but Irving, until that point, it just goes to me to say, as always, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and being an absolute beacon of knowledge, a fountain of knowledge.
Well, it's a great privilege for me and a great pleasure at the same time. Thank you.
It's the year 300 in the Roman Empire. Christianity is a small, fragmented religious minority and about to face the harshest persecution in its history. But fast forward 100 years, and the emperors are Christian, pagan temples are closing, and bishops are political heavyweights. How did this happen? How did an empire that once hunted Christians come to embrace them? Today we're tackling one of the most dramatic religious and political transformations in world history, the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire. To help us unpack this extraordinary story, we're joined once again by historian Peter Heather, whose book, Christendom, explores how a tiny persecuted sect defeated its religious rivals, converted Constantine, and eventually came to dominate the whole of Europe.
Peter, welcome back to the show. It is great to have you back on the podcast.
It's fantastic to be here. And we're talking about something else.
We're talking about something else. I mean, who'd have thought it? We've done the fall of Rome, we've done the Saxons, and now we're doing the rise of Christianity. And I think it's fair to say the 4th century, it's a big century for Christianity.
It's actually huge. There's quite a lot of scholarship out there that doesn't quite want to recognize it, but if you look at the before and the after, then a lot changes.
And can we say that this is one of the few big revolutionary moments in European and maybe even in world history, which is the rise and Romanization of Christianity across this century?
In my view, you absolutely can. I mean, it's very hard to shake off hindsight here, because we know Christianity becomes this dominant cultural system across the European landscape, and then in the process of European expansion and colonization in the early modern and modern periods, it spreads across the globe. And you have this colossal structure, absolutely colossal. The thought that it was anything ever other than colossal and that it might not have become so colossal, that is really hard to encompass when you first start thinking about it, I think. So, stretching your mind back and really looking at the process that led to this outcome, that is worth doing but hard to do.
I guess it's also interesting, as we'll delve into with certain key moments that epitomize this. I mean, what is it? It's the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea this year as well.
Yes, it is.
So, like, you also see over this century almost like the formulation of, can we say almost like official Christianity at the time, the kind of defining what is right and what is wrong in their eyes.
Absolutely so. If you're thinking about Christianity the system, then obviously when you're deciding what is the Christian view on anything, you go back to the Bible as the source texts, Old Testament, New Testament. But there is no religious system straightforwardly in the Bible. You have to extract the passages that you think are relevant to any particular topic, understanding of God, what is good piety, all the key questions. And then you have to string them together in an order and iron out any ambiguities or potential contradictions occasionally. So turning the biblical evidence into the backbone of a system, that is a huge intellectual process. And it takes a long time. Some of it doesn't happen really until the 12th century, but the 4th century is a big moment where some really key things are sorted out.
And do we have quite a rich array of source material for charting this rise of Christianity throughout the 4th century?
For the 4th century, we do have a lot of material. You've got a spread of Christianity through the highly literate classes, the Roman elites, and they write a lot about it. And with the removal of persecution, the Christian intellectual centers, places like Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, their physical record of their writings doesn't get disturbed or broken up in the way that it did before. I mean, they'd been literate since whenever, but the continuity in the transmission of texts is disturbed and broken up by persecution, whereas from the 4th century onward, it doesn't. So there's a certain amount of self-centering where they burn the products of people who are deemed to be wrong as this process unfolds. But if you look at the sheer quantity of writing that survives about Christianity from the 4th century, I mean, it's colossal. Would fill some very good bookshelves.
Probably this one.
Oh, easily.
And quite a few
easily.
more.
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
And as you also highlighted there, it's not very lovey-dovey, very peaceful, this rise of Christianity. There is some violent episodes in it as well, which we'll certainly cover.
Yeah.
And I guess also on the archaeology side, I'd think of things like coinage straight away, but also architecture, the building of big churches and the like. I guess those are our other sources of information for this.
Yes, they are. And we do start to get them. There's only, I think there are about 2, possibly 3 pre-4th century churches that have been identified, and at least one of those is contentious. But they're basically just house churches. They're not purpose-built buildings. So the one at Duroropos, which is the best preserved one.
The Pompeii on the Euphrates.
Yeah, absolutely. That is just a townhouse which has been converted for Christian use. So a central meeting room and a few side rooms, but it's just a house. It's like sort of modern Protestant sects that meet in houses.
Well, let's start exploring that. But first of all, let's go back right to the beginning of the 4th century. So 300 AD, Peter, what does Christianity look like at this time? Because often you'll get little snippets online saying that Christianity at this time was only like 5 or 10%. So what do we know about this?
You don't have an exact figure, of course. Well, it wouldn't be fun if you did. Would there be nothing to argue about? You have to kind of extrapolate. And there are some grandiose estimates suggesting that Christianity is between 10 and 20%. But there's no way that can be true.
And also, when we're saying that, we mean within the bounds of the Roman Empire.
Within the bounds of the Roman Empire, yes. There are a few Christian communities in the Persian Empire and Mesopotamia. Not anywhere else, I don't think. Don't think it's spreading across the Silk Road yet in any dramatic way. But that figure's got to be wrong. The reason it's got to be wrong is that 90% of the Roman population are peasants living in the countryside. And we know that Christianity doesn't spread systematically into the countryside until the 6th century. It's actually a post-Roman phenomenon in the West. There are one or two areas of the countryside, Asia Minor, Egypt, Syria, Palestine, where there clearly is some penetration of the countryside, but North Africa as well. Many parts of the Roman Empire, no sign of any Christianity in the countryside whatsoever. So you can't get to 20%. That knocks that out. And then if you go more positively, a lot of French scholars, Roman Catholic, have put a lot of effort into just identifying how many bishops there might be, because the mark of an organized Christian community is whether it has a bishop or not in about 300 AD. And there are 1,800 or so city units in the Roman Empire, and about 600 of these have an organized Christian community. So only 1/3.
Do you think that might even include London in the northwest?
3 Brits make it to the Council of Nicaea in 325.
So that might suggest that,
Yes.
25 years earlier, there
Yes.
probably still was a bishop of London
I would
at
have
that
thought,
time.
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably spread up through the sort of busier networks, economic and social networks of the Roman Empire. So 1/3 of the cities have an organized Christian community, but 2/3 don't. City populations 10 to 15%. We're down at more 5% max, but that's obviously too much too, because although they've got Christian communities, the total population of these cities is not Christian. They're living in and amongst other believers. So the oldest continuous Christian community of all is Antioch, because Jerusalem gets broken up in the revolt and the diaspora against the Roman rule in the start of the 2nd century AD. So Antioch is actually the oldest continuous Christian community. And from the 380s, where we have lots of information about Antioch, it looks as though Christians are about 1/3 of the population of Antioch only.
Okay.
That the Jewish community and the classical pagan community are both about the same. Actually, everybody goes to everybody else's parties, but at that point, which the bishops don't like. But you know, so if the oldest Christian community of all is only 1/3 of 5%, as it were, then I don't see how you can get Christian numbers up above 1 to 2%.
No, because also, if I think ancient Syria, you might think also, like, I guess, Mithras from further east, but then Eligabal and all those kind of Syrian deities as well, and the Jewish community and the like. But is it very much the case that, let's say, the Bishop of Rome, like the successors of St. Peter, and their like small community in Rome, the exact like beliefs that they were following in Rome was probably different to what that small Christian community in somewhere like London were following, or Antioch, or Hippo Regius in North Africa?
We know that that is the case because this is one of the processes that does come fully into the light of day in the 4th century, is that all these communities come into direct contact with one another, and they find out that they don't quite believe the same things. The big issue, of course, because it is the kind of unique thing about Christianity, is this extraordinary doctrine about the deity, 3 in 1, Trinity. And one person of it, one person of the Trinity, namely Christ, being fully human and fully divine. You know, easy to say, but what does it mean? You know, exactly, what does that mean? You know, how are we to understand Christ, the figure of Christ, and what is the implications of Christ's teaching for us, given that he's like us but not like us?
And this will lead to names such as the Arians and the Donatists, and you know, you'll see that explode later as well, won't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is the big dispute. The first big dispute that explodes in the 4th century is that you find that people are placing different emphases on the extent to which Christ's humanity is what's important, or Christ's divinity is what's important, how to understand this. And it goes back to the biblical evidence, because the smartest description of this I've ever come across is that actually the problem is created by the Gospels. You've got 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which present a very human Christ. And it's a Christ who suffers. It's a Christ who prays in the Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, but thy will be done, when praying to the Father. This does not sound like an equal divine personage. It sounds hierarchical. But then you have the Gospel of John, and its fabulous opening. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, you know, complete cosmic equality. So the fundamental problem that Christians are facing is you have to explain John away in terms of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or you have to explain Matthew, Mark, and Luke away in terms of John.
And we'll delve into all that. I mean, one last question from me. Of course, you get all the so-called apocryphal Gospels as well today, but at this time, let's say around 300 AD, can we presume that certain of these Gospels, like the infancy Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of James and so on, that in some of these communities would not have been seen as apocryphal? You know, they would have learned those Gospels as well. So we shouldn't also be thinking that they had different beliefs, but they all were looking at the same Gospels and then interpreting them differently. Some of them probably looked at different Gospels to others. Certainly.
I mean, the main manuscripts we have of these alternative Gospel texts are 4th century papyri.
There you go.
So they're all still floating around.
So it's another span in the works there. But...
Yeah, I mean, they had more or less decided, or some people had decided, the shape of the New Testament. So it's only the 4 Gospels and then Acts and the epistles. Not so they weren't so sure about Revelation at that point. But
Book of Revelation is fascinating, but that's a story for another time.
Indeed.
Okay, so that's really nicely set the background of like the Christian world in 300 AD. So maybe 1 or 2%, largely in urban cities, Antioch and North Africa, Anatolia, bigger presences, but also small ones in London and Rome and so on. So let's start, now we've set that context, with the last big persecution of Christians that happens around this time. And it is known as the Great Persecution, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. unfolds in a series of decrees, which eventually culminate in a kind of sacrifice or die order. It looks as though it kills a few hundred people, are executed in the course of it. The sort of more persuasive martyr acts. You have some material that's entirely authoritative and every reason to believe it. Some that's a bit more fanciful, but yeah.
And this is Emperor Diocletian telling people like you need to do sacrifices to the gods to keep them happy, and sort of
Yes.
as the Christians say we can't do that, and then a few of them who keep refusing do ultimately get, as you say, martyred in this persecution.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
And how big an impact do you think this persecution actually has on Christians throughout the Roman Empire at that time?
The best marker of its effect is that in the areas where Christianity had spread a bit more widely, so like Egypt or North Africa, the hot issue after it stops is what to do about lapsi, people who had sacrificed or handed over the Gospels. You had to hand over the holy text. Traditores, as they were called, people who handed the material over. And there are very fierce disputes in the North African and the Egyptian churches in the 310s onwards about this. So that strongly suggests that it did generate a bitter divide amongst those who faced up to the full rigor of persecution and held to their faith without flinching, and those who found various accommodations. And that the accommodation thing is interesting because that's the other striking thing about the so-called Great Persecution. It is a top-down process. In the 2nd century, you've got people like Tertullian saying every time a volcano goes off or an earthquake, throw the Christians to the lions.
Christians' fault, is it?
Yeah, that's right. But no one's saying that in the 4th century. And we know that town councils who had to enforce the collection of holy scripts and whatever would do deals with their local communities to hand over, some account books, not the Gospels. So there isn't any sign of that kind of spontaneous suspicion and hatred of Christianity. I think in the 1st century, people were confused by the body and blood stuff and thought weird stuff was going on in Christian rituals. But by the 4th century, they're part of the urban fabric. And
this was also what I was going to ask. I mean, like, would you think this, so-called Great Persecution was popular with the everyday Roman? But it sounds like what you're saying there, by the 4th century, probably not, because they've lived alongside Christians for so long, even though they are a minority.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the real issue about Great Persecution is why was it ever launched? Because, Diocletian successfully puts back the Roman Empire together, beats off the Persian threat, creates this system, and then 17 years later, having successfully done everything, turns to religious matters.
You're right. I mean, it is for an emperor who otherwise would rightly be heralded as one of, like, I guess you could say, greatest or one of the most significant Roman emperors. This is kind of, for many people, like the biggest stain on his reputation, the fact that he did decide to do this.
Yeah, and it's also, it's kind of bonkers logically. If you think that you have to get the gods' favor to be successful, then you would think you would do that at the beginning, whereas actually he's successful and then he does it.
Is it fair to say that this Great Persecution is very much a failure, and Christianity, as we get to the rise of the next big figure, Constantine, it is as strong as it's ever been?
Yes, I do think that's right. And in fact, there are big queries over why it's launched. My best guess, for what it's worth, is that it's really about a power struggle within Diocletian's ruling circle, and that people who don't like Constantine's father, who's a co-emperor with Diocletian, think that he is soft on the Christianity angle, and they are trying to expose that and particularly cut Constantine out of succession. So I think it's a kind of struggle within the inner imperial circles. And it's very striking, for instance, that no martyrs are created in Constantine's father, Constantius, runs Gaul and Britain, and there are no martyrs from the Great Persecution. Churches are shut down and whatever, but no one's killed.
No one's killed, indeed. And then, of course, he becomes Constantine's father, Constantius, dies in York.
Yes.
And Constantine is proclaimed emperor in 306 in York.
In York.
Do you think there could have been a Christian community in York as well?
There might easily have been.
One of the northernmost of them all. Wow.
Yeah. Well, because Christianity in the West is spreading through the bigger Roman communities, not in the countryside. So, York is a major imperial capital, regional capital.
And if you get the worship of Mithras on Hadrian's Wall, then may well have been some Christianity there as well.
There isn't a bishop at that point. But.
A bishop of Hadrian's Wall, can you imagine that? Well, okay, let's go on to one of these big traditional landmarks in the story of the rise of Christianity, which is the conversion of Constantine, and also got in here the Edict of Milan. Now, I will say that if you want to learn more in detail about the life of Constantine, we have done separate episodes really delving into that. So we're going to kind of approach it through the lens of Christianity here, Peter, and not going to do the whole biography of Constantine.
Okay, I promise not to talk about the whole biography.
Yes, where was he born? No, so do we have any idea with his background and with his family, what might have inspired his conversion to Christianity?
Well, yes, it's interesting, really interesting, because he says different things to different people about his conversion. We have two accounts of it. You've got this, the classic image is cross in the sky just before the Milvian Bridge, dream.
Big battle, 312 AD, yeah.
Win. But those are constructed in different ways in two contemporary sources. Lactantius in the 310s, and then Eusebius of Caesarea in the biography he writes of Constantine after Constantine's death. So there's something a bit dodgy about that. And what's even more striking is that Constantine's religious position, his official one, as proclaimed by his spokesman and on his coinage, has 4 stages. So straightforward tetrarchic paganism, loyal to Diocletian, same thing to start with. Then he becomes a solar monotheist. So Helios, sun god.
Oh, Sol Invictus, this idea, is it?
Yes, Sol Invictus. Then he becomes Christian when talking to Christians, but otherwise vague monotheism, with still a lot of sun, then Christian to everyone. So there are 4 distinct stages. Each of those stages are marked by political victory, military victory. That's what separates them. So he moves to solar monotheism when he defeats Diocletian's old buddy Maximian. He moves to the Christian to Christians, though vague monotheism to everybody else, after the Milvian Bridge when he defeats Maximian's son Maxentius.
Yeah.
And then he's Christian to everyone after he defeats Licinius in 324.
324, so that's 12 years after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. So these aren't abrupt, kind of quick stages from one to another. They're big.
And so at least part of the story of Constantine is coming out as Christian. Where in this progression do you date his actual conversion? He's not completely open about this.
He's promoting himself at the same time to both audiences.
Yes, he is.
It's very interesting. I remember, as I've said in the past, I remember talking to David Potter so many years ago now, but I always remember this one of the things kind of mentioned in our chat is this idea that for quite a bit of time, let's say between 312 and 324, it's almost like he is hedging his divine bets.
Oh, he absolutely is hedging his bets, yeah.
And you see it in the coinage, you see it in everything to kind of please both sides.
Absolutely. My own hunch is that he was always Christian.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's always a story of coming out. At least a sort of Neoplatonic, vague, monotheistic line from his father. His mother makes this famous visit to the Holy Land.
His mother, yes. Okay.
Got a sister called Anastasia, which means resurrection.
So you think, how big an influence do you think his mother might have had on it all? Do you think she was maybe inviting a Christian bishop in his early years when he was growing up?
I think it's at least possible. And the thing is, he has to have a conversion because if he hasn't had a conversion, he is one of the lapsi. He has hidden his Christianity in the great persecution. So he has to cover his rear end by having had a conversion after the great persecution.
So that
I may be being overly devious, I do realize that.
No, but it's very interesting to hear this idea that actually perhaps, which is so, completely new compared to other Roman emperors before him, that actually maybe he was influenced by Christianity from his earliest years.
And again, it ties into the explanation of why the great persecution was launched. His father, Constantius, is one of 4 emperors. They're thinking about succession. Diocletian has said he's going to retire. Everyone's concerned with who the next emperor is going to be. And, the knives are out. So trying to cut Constantius's line out of contention for the succession strikes me as by far the most plausible reason as to why the great persecution was launched.
Wow, that is fascinating. Well, I had to delve into that more in another chat.
I may have spent too much of my youth Kremlin watching.
Well, moving on.
Yes, putting that to one side.
So if we go to that 4th stage that you mentioned earlier, so after 324, when he defeats Licinius, and from that time, it's gone from a rule of 4 to post Milvian Bridge, a rule of 2,
yes.
Constantine and Licinius, to now a restoring of a rule of 1.
Yes.
Just Constantine.
Yes.
He's founded Constantinople by this time, has he?
Starting.
He's starting. And so how do we now see this fully, openly promoting of Christianity, Constantine coming to the fore after 324?
The element to feed in is Roman imperial ideology, which says that God chooses emperors.
Right.
And you can tell God is on your side by whether you win. Because, if the supreme omnipotent creator of the entire cosmos is on your side, you ought to bloody well win. It's quite straightforward. And Constantine has won. He has won in spades. In fact, there were 6 emperors. Actually, might be 7. Sorry, brain going. In 306. I think there are 7 contenders in 306, of which he's won. And he is the last man standing out of all of this. And he's won all these victories. God is certainly on his side. And this is what gives him the ideological clout to stand up and say, I'm Christian. Christianity is the right religion.
And if someone was to go to his royal court, let's say 325, would they expect or would they see Christian imagery like surrounding him in his court already by that time?
They would see some, absolutely. We're starting to get crosses on some of his. We've had the Librarum in a few contexts after 312, but only a very few.
So what do we mean?
Librarum is the cross with the semicircle at the top.
Oh, like the Cairo.
Yeah,
okay.
the Cairo symbol. So we've had, but only in a very few. Now it's on his coinage. Still Sol Invictus as well, depending on which coin. I mean, he's playing it up to every audience. But yes, you're seeing Librarum, you're seeing bishops invited to court. He doesn't stop patronizing pagans. It's not a kind of universal switch because he couldn't. There are too many pagans in the world, but certainly Christianity has its place at court now and is allowed in.
And you get the rise of bishops like, I guess, Sylvester. Is it Pope Sylvester I in Rome at that time? And
yes, although whether Constantine ever met Sylvester.
Really? Interesting.
It's medieval popes who put out the idea that Sylvester cures Constantine of leprosy and baptizes.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's quite a stretch.
There's a bit of skin in that game.
But it seems very much so that, so we won't go into the Council of Nicaea too much at the moment because we've done episodes in the past on it, but by 325 at that time, when that council is called and they're getting together to kind of decide like the Trinity and all of that, the fact that Constantine is there and seen as the figurehead there, I know he's not there the whole time, but he's there for a bit of the time. Very clearly by that point, he is openly showing himself as Christian.
Yes, absolutely. As soon as he defeats Licinius, he writes a letter to the provincials, which Eusebius has a text of and puts in his Life of Constantine. And there he's totally straightforward, says, I'm Christian, any anti-Christian measures are being removed, but if you want to carry on being ridiculously superstitious and pagan, you can.
Right.
I mean, the language is very straightforward.
It's almost like a toleration the other way.
Yes, it is a
from what it
toleration
means.
the other way.
And actually going back to the toleration the other way before that, because this is really interesting to put as a contrast to this. If we then talk about the Edict of Milan that had happened about a decade or so earlier.
Yes, that's after the defeat of Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge.
So it's halfway through those phases of Constantine coming out, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us through what the Edict of Milan is and how important a stage this is in Constantine's development?
Yes, it is. It is the edict that officially ends the Great Persecution. In fact, it looks as though enforcement had petered out after about 306. But you have strongly pagan emperors in the east that Licinius defeats. It's a joint decree by Licinius and Constantine, which is effectively removing the great persecution edicts and taking away their force.
As time goes on, and Constantine, he reigns into the 330s, how significant, how important then is this aligning of Christianity with the Roman state, with the Roman emperor, in the rise of Christianity at that time, and the more, I guess, the creation of a Christianity proper, as it was?
I think it's impossible to escape the conclusion that the slow coming together of Christianity and the Roman imperial system is a profoundly revolutionary moment in the history of Christianity. It sets in motion a series of processes that mean that Christianity, as it emerges, say, 100 years after Constantine, is completely different from what we understand it to be in about 300 AD. It isn't, of course, just Constantine. It's really the fact that Constantine inaugurates a succession of Christian emperors, which is only broken for 2 years by his, I don't know what he is, weird second cousin twice removed.
Julian. We'll get to Julian in a bit, yes.
But otherwise we have 100 years of Christian emperors where the tie-in between Christian religious devotion and the Roman state is unbroken. And over the course of that 100 years, a series of processes play themselves out, which totally transform Christianity.
And is this also this alignment, this centralization of Christianity in the Roman Empire, started by Constantine, I guess also maybe benefited by him being a one-man rule at the time? We mentioned earlier how a Christian community somewhere in London may well have been following different beliefs to a Christian community in North Africa or in Rome. With the centralization and that link of Christianity and the more kind of unity of Christianity under Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, does that also result in a more uniform set of beliefs, so that actually by the 330s, a Christian community in London would by and large be following the same beliefs as a Christian community in West Asia, for instance?
Yes to the process, no to the chronology. Takes a bit longer.
It takes a bit longer, okay.
By the 430s, yes. In fact, Nicaea doesn't settle the argument. It's the start of the argument.
And this is the argument around the Trinity.
It is exactly, and the relationship between God the Father and God the Son. Really, whether it's a hierarchical relationship, you know, Father, Son can, I don't know why I say that, having sons, it implies subordination of the Father to sons rather than anything else. But anyway, to most people, in most contexts, Father, Son implies hierarchy.
Okay, respect thy elders in some context, Peter. Okay, we can understand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But there's then, well, what is it? It's 56 years of back and forth. And the official Christian, Roman Christian position for 35 of those is actually hierarchical Trinity. It's only with the Council of Constantinople in the early 380s that Nicaea is reaffirmed, and then you get the crucial enforcement process, which involves the power of the Roman state. Because what happens is, under Theodosius, Council of Constantinople reaffirms Nicaea, but actually what everyone says in church as the Nicene Creed is actually the Creed of Constantinople. It's not the Creed of Nicaea, It's a slightly rewritten creed that came out of that second council. And then this massive enforcement whereby the churches of those who held to a more hierarchical Trinity are confiscated. Churches, all their endowments, all their property, and huge fines are put in place for important lay supporters of those positions. And it's that which shuts down the non-Nicene Christianity.
I mean, how do you think Constantine fared when he's ruling and he still sees that there are, in these early stages, there are still bitter divisions amongst the Christians at this time, as even though he's favoring them, with the imagery and kind of that reverse toleration kind of decree where now they're tolerating non-Christian religions. How do you think he feels, still seeing that, there is now kind of rivalry and I guess animosity